America is the only country in the world, I think, whose leaders insult China.
In what
I
ways?
tell you, no Asian country insults China.
What do we say that insults China?
And you know what? If China was really a closed, repressive society, would 139 million leave China freely? Okay, it's about twice the population of the United Kingdom. And then these stupid people return to China freely. Overthrow the Chinese Communist Party? Cannot be done. Isolate China? Cannot be done. Stop the Chinese economy from becoming number one? Cannot be done. I believe that the United States and China can have a win-win relationship. Absolutely.
Why do so many Westerners get China wrong? For years, the common belief was that as China became richer, it would eventually become more like the West. But instead of changing into a Western-style system, China became a global superpower with its own vision for the future. So why did so many people miscalculate China's rise? Is it because China is misunderstood, or because the world has been looking at China from the wrong perspective? Well, Professor Kishore Mahbubani believes the answer goes much deeper than politics. Take a look.
And that's exactly what America is doing in terms of handling China. Because what Americans don't realize, and I'm talking actually of the most liberal, the most thoughtful American intellectuals and their perspectives on China, they don't seem to understand that the very idea that a 250-year-old upstart in world history could convert a 4,000-year-old civilization with four times the population and convert it to become a replica of the United States of America. And the very thought of it is so arrogant, and future historians will say this is unbelievable. What were these guys thinking? So what we are seeing today in China is a very natural return of a civilization which over 4,000 years goes for 200 years, it goes down. And it has gone down for 150 years. And then it's coming up for another 200 years now. And it's just beginning to come out. And the idea that this civilization, when it wakes up, is going to forget its 4,000-year-old history and say, hey, I want to be like America.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's an absolutely stupid assumption that completely fogs American thinking on China, because at the end of the day, one thing that Asians who live in Asia know, that this is an old civilization. It will remain Chinese civilization. It will behave like Chinese civilization, and we can get along with it.
Professor Kishore Mahbubani is absolutely right. One big reason the US and China often clash is because they see the world very differently. When America became independent in 1776, China already had thousands of years of history behind it, and that history still influences how China thinks today. The US tends to think in shorter cycles. A president has only a few years to prove results, so politics often focuses on what can be achieved quickly. China, on the other hand, takes a much longer view. Its leaders often think about where the country will be decades from now, not just what happens in the next few years. For a long time, many in the West believed that if China became richer, it would eventually become more like the US. But China chose a different path. From Beijing's perspective, this is not about copying the West. It is about China becoming a major power again after centuries of ups and downs. And that's where the rivalry comes from. The US believes its system represents the best model for the world. China believes it has its own way of doing things. So the competition between them is not just about trade, technology, or military. It's also about two very different ideas of how a country should be run and how the world should be shaped.
Well, I think all you have to do is go to China and travel around China. And, as part of my research for my book, Has China Won, I spent 2 months at Fudan University. And, the Chinese people have seen far greater improvement in their lives over the past 30 years or 40 years than they have seen in 3,000, 4,000 years of Chinese history. For the Chinese people, and it's important to remember the bottom 50% through much of Chinese history struggled to eke out a living, really struggled. Okay. And then suddenly all these people now have what? They have houses, they have jobs, their children are getting educated, they get medical care. And you know what? If China was really a closed, repressive society, would 139 million leave China freely? Okay, it's about twice the population of the United Kingdom. And then these stupid people return to China freely.
So
to
they
what is
leave.
supposed to be a repressive society.
So they go out on
Come on.
vacation and they could, and they could stay, but they come back.
Yeah,
in other words, there are
so
people. It's not like the the Berlin Wall. It's not like they're it's like it wouldn't be that hard to leave. They're not leaving.
No, they can leave. Anybody can leave China.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the West see China only as a closed and heavily controlled country. But there's another side of the story that often gets ignored. Before the pandemic, more than 150 million Chinese tourists were traveling overseas every year. They visited Europe, Southeast Asia, and the US, experienced different societies, and then went back home. That raises an interesting question. If life in China was truly unbearable, why would so many people choose to return? One reason is that China has gone through one of the biggest economic transformations in human history. In just a few decades, hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of extreme poverty. Cities were transformed, and living standards improved dramatically. Of course, China still faces criticism over issues like political freedom and government control. But many Chinese citizens judge their government based on what they can see in daily life. Better jobs, better infrastructure, and a much higher quality of life compared to the past. And this difference in perspective is another reason why China and the West often see the country so differently.
I believe that the United States and China can have a win-win relationship. Absolutely. Where the American people basically are better off and the Chinese people are better off. So that is the end goal of my writing. I think it can be done. But of course, it can only be done if you, number one, treat China with respect. America is the only country in the world, I think, whose leaders insult China.
In what ways?
I tell you, no Asian country insults China.
What do we say that insults China?
You just have to read the speech that Mike Pompeo gave at the Nixon Library, I think on some anniversary of Kissinger's visit in 2021. And you can see the sort of speeches he gave, 2020. I mean, those sorts of speeches, the condescension, the idea that we're going to liberate the Chinese people, that the Chinese government is illegitimate, that the Chinese government is repressive,
Yeah.
and all these things. And the point is, if you really want to engage in a geopolitical contest, and I've been studying geopolitics for over 50 years, since 1971, the first rule of geopolitics is know thine enemy. Know thyself. Fight 1,000 battles, win 1,000 battles. And if you completely misunderstand China and you don't understand what its strengths and weaknesses are, then you will lose the fight.
Mm.
And the Chinese, this is the biggest advantage the Chinese have over the United States of America. The Chinese leaders think long-term and have a long-term strategy for managing the United States of America. The United States, and as I say in my book, this was told to me, the conversation I had with Henry Kissinger, the United States doesn't have a long-term strategy. If you ask any person in the administration, what are you trying to achieve? What is your goal? Let me give you three hypothetical examples. Overthrow the Chinese Communist Party. Cannot be done. Isolate China. Cannot be done. stop the Chinese economy from becoming number one. Cannot be done. So what are your objectives? So you have to learn to live with realities. That's what geopolitics is about. And the United States of America can remain the most admired society in the world even after China becomes the number one economy. That's a possible goal. That's a realistic goal. And that's what United States should try to do.
Another reason the US-China relationship keeps getting worse is because both sides often talk past each other. Some Chinese observers, including people like Professor Kishore Mahbubani and Jeffrey Sachs, argue that Washington sometimes approaches China with a sense of superiority, trying to lecture China instead of trying to understand it. A good example was when former US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo openly called on the Chinese people to change their government. To many in China, that sounded less like support and more like another foreign power telling China how to run itself. But the bigger issue is that the world cannot really ignore the relationship between these two superpowers. You see, the US and China are the two biggest economies on Earth. Together, they drive a huge part of global growth, technology, and innovation. When they cooperate, the entire world benefits. Like when both countries work together on climate change. The challenge is finding a way for both sides to compete without turning every issue into a fight. The US does not have to agree with China's system, and China does not have to follow the US model. But in a world facing problems like climate change, AI, and economic uncertainty, these two powers still need to find a way to work together. So, do you agree with Professor Kishore Mahbubani? Has China's rise been misunderstood by the West, or does China's growing influence represent a real challenge to the global order? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into geopolitics and the forces shaping our world. Thank you for watching.